Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Rudy Giuliani, and welcome to Bay Area People. Now, this weekend, the nation remembers the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. This morning, we'll meet a woman who has reached out and helped survivors of sudden loss. Now, using her own experience of sudden loss with her fiancé, author Heidi Snow is now sharing stories from 9/11 and other tragic accidents to help provide grief support. We'll then turn the attention to the question of how to provide jobs. One answer here in the Bay Area is the Treasure Island Job Corps. We'll find out why this job corps is so successful and how they're using the culinary trade for training and job placement. And how many times have you had a chance to visit one of Sausalito's famous houseboats? Next weekend is your chance to see what it's like to live in a floating home and to experience their unique and creative features. That and more coming up today on Bay Area People, so please stay tuned. We will be right back. While the nation observes this 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, thousands of families are also dealing with the terrible loss of someone he or she loved. My first guest this morning knows what these families are experiencing because she too experienced sudden loss when her fiancé died in an airplane crash in 1996. She has since created an organization devoted to helping people experiencing sudden loss and has just written a book called Surviving Sudden Loss. And they're all about stories from around the country of people who've been in that situation. I'd like to welcome to Bay Area People author Heidi Snow. Thank you very much, Heidi.
Thanks for having me.
There's so much more than the book, and we just want to go to the very beginning. You were engaged to a wonderful young man back in 1996 when he was in an airplane crash. Can you tell us briefly what that story is?
Yeah, so I lost my fiance on TWA Flight 800 back in 1996. And
it was a flight from New York
to... It was a flight from JFK to Paris. Okay. And right when the incident occurred, we all gathered and came together at a site where we would all try to gather as much information and remains were being searched for and that kind of thing. But after about 2 weeks, all the disaster response teams disbanded and we all went home. And one of the things I found most difficult is after the funeral, and while I was still waiting for his body to be recovered, we were sent back just to go back to life as normal. But for me, life wasn't normal, and for the other 200 people who lost 229 people were on that flight, and they all had to resume their life, go back to work. And what we found is people were having a hard time. And I had met Mayor Giuliani on the site, and he had said, if you ever need anything, give me a call. And I thought, well, I'm in New York City, there must be a plane crash group. And I contacted his office, and they said, well, there isn't one, but maybe the families from Lockerbie 8 years ago might be a valuable resource to you because they've been through it before. So I went to that meeting, and when I walked in there, it was like we didn't have to say a word. It was just, we all knew what it was like to be in this situation, and they welcomed me with open arms.
And you said and part of it is that people are supportive of you, and they go through the grief with you, and they go through the motions of, making plans and getting things settled and trying to get yourself back into your regular routine of life. But after that, people kind of had an attitude like, okay, it's time for you, go on with your life.
Right.
Get over it. And you say that that's not that easy. You can't do that quickly.
I just learned so quickly how important it was to be around other people who got it, who got that maybe 3 weeks later, 2 months later, 2 years later, you might have a bad day.
Right.
And as the rest of the world moves on, sometimes people don't want to bring it up and they don't want to make you uncomfortable. But what we've learned from this book and through Access is that people need to talk about it. And so the concept of Access is that we pair people up with one another of like loss so that they can talk to somebody.
Your nonprofit is called Access. It's Aircraft Casualty Emotional Support. And you started it because of the gathering of family members, of people who've lost family members or loved ones through plane crashes.
Right. And so our first volunteer base came from the Pan Am families, and I began matching mothers from Pan Am 103 to mothers from TWA 800 who had lost children. And as that started to grow and those relationships became really bonded, I went back to Giuliani's office and I said, here's what we have. This is from going to that meeting, here's what we've learned. And he said, we definitely need something like this. We never know when the next plane's going to go down out of JFK. And unfortunately, we had Swiss Air, Egypt Air, Alaska Air actually on the West Coast, and then we had 9/11.
And Giuliani actually called your organization. I know he was instrumental and was part of the process of creating Access. But when 9/11 happened, he actually asked you to help out with the families that suffered loss through that tragedy.
Yes, he had been working with us the whole time, but we were the only organization up and running and already ready because we have 250 grief mentors on call at all times affected by aviation disasters. So of course, when this happened quickly, we were really the only entity up, running, and ready to go immediately.
And the book, Surviving Sudden Loss, Stories from Those Who Have Lived It, or stories from people who went through 9/11 as well as some of the other airplane tragedies around the country. And what it really is they're just telling the story, and as well as you tell your story about your loss. It's not a how-to, it's not really advice, but just simply their story. How does reading that story or those stories help me get over something that happened to me?
Well, like the concept of access, it is basically being able to talk to somebody else validates that what you're going through is normal. And it's okay if you're having a bad day when maybe other people haven't been through the same thing. Don't acknowledge it anymore. In this book, everybody talks about how important it is to embrace your loss and go through it and bring people around and do things that help you grieve and not put it under the rug and really allow you to be the new person you've become from that second when that happened.
Well, we hear that maybe people might go into therapy. Is that different from something like Access where you're providing a mentor with somebody that's gone through the same kind of loss?
It's a different type of care. Of course, we think all care is wonderful, and if you have the courage to reach out and get it, it's very important. Our specific care is really validating and having a role model, somebody where if you're having you can see that you can get through it because they have too. Other care is very important too. We always encourage people to do a little bit of everything and get what is best for them. But what we find with Access is just being able to identify with somebody else makes it feel like when you feel like you're not healing through the stages, or maybe you're having a bad day and you feel like you've been set back 2 years, that's okay. And then you go back to, you just have their setbacks along the process, and we get it. And sometimes the rest of the world doesn't understand that you might be grieving somebody who was killed 15 years ago, and you're just, something came up that made you think of them, and that's okay.
So Access has a 24-hour hotline.
Right.
And you provide the volunteers are primarily people who've gone through your program, and they've maybe they're recovering, but they're helping other people recover now. So they're sharing that information, and you do try to match like with like.
Right. So when somebody calls our helpline for help, we go through our database and we find the most similar loss. So if somebody calls and says, I just lost my husband, I've got 3 little kids, we find another mother who similarly went through that. So they can say, this is how I did it. And that you can do it too. And I'm your role model here. And when you're having a bad day, I got over those roadblocks. It's somebody to follow and give you hope that you can get through the next day.
And Access is now located here in San Francisco.
Right. Our volunteers are all around the country, but our primary location is here in San Francisco.
Well, the information will be up on screen, so thank you very much for sharing it. And again, the Surviving Sudden Loss, Stories from Those Who Have Lived It, it really is interesting reading, having these people share their stories so publicly. So thank you very much for making that happen.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Heidi. All right, what we're going to do is now take a short break, because coming up next, there are jobs available in the Bay Area, and the Treasure Island Job Corps will make sure that you're trained and ready. We'll have details, so stay with us. We'll be right back.